This is the story of a golden girl who went to celebrate her graduation on a paradise island, only she just didn't come back. We're going to get into not only how she vanished, but also the 18-year web of lies that, kept it hidden. But the scariest part, it's not the disappearance itself. The scariest part is the reason. The reason a party in paradise turned into an act of such barbaric, senseless cruelty. This reason turned out to be so petty, it breaks your brain. So definitely watch all the way to the end, because that's where, in the final confession, we find out what exactly made the killer so angry that night. Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe good evening, my dear friends. My name, as always, is Dean. I'm so glad to welcome you back to my channel. Today, we are taking a deep dive looking into the extremely puzzling, tragic case of Natalee Holloway. So before we begin, just so you're aware, if this happens to be your first time here, I post true crime stories, stuff like the strangest cases, right here on this channel every single week. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, if you're also, let's say, a true crime addict, please seriously consider subscribing to the channel. Every single subscription, honestly, it really, really helps me out. All right, so with all that said, please go grab coffee or tea or a cappuccino or, whatever you've got over there. Settle in, get comfortable, prepare for a really deep dive. This is the case of Natalee Holloway. Welcome to Aruba, folks. Located like a diamond in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. Aruba is that exact postcard-perfect exotic island that promises charm, but as we'll soon find out, it also hides intrigue. Here's the first fact for you, which might just break your expectations, because it definitely broke mine. This island is actually a constituent part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Yeah, the same Europe, just thousands of miles away. Now, apparently, most Arubans speak at least 4 languages fluently. I mean, just imagine that level. They enjoy a vibrant, relaxed lifestyle, but of course, they even have their own brewery. It might be relatively small, but it sufficiently serves this tiny island, all local. But here's the most interesting fact, the one that's key to our story today. Aruba has the lowest crime rate in the entire Caribbean, the lowest. This makes what happened here not just a tragedy, but like an almost impossible paradox. It's the place where nothing bad ever happens. Until it did. However, before we find ourselves in that sun, we first need to travel 2,000 miles northwest to the state of Tennessee. This is where we find our main protagonist, a young woman named Natalee Holloway. Natalee was born on October 21st, 1986, to her parents Dave Holloway Sr., Elizabeth Holloway, growing up in Memphis, Tennessee. As is often the case, the first few years of her life were totally peaceful, idyllic. But unfortunately, at 7 years old, that peace fractured. Her mother-father divorced. Despite the separation, her younger brother, Matthew, importantly, maintained close relationships with both sides of their family. So, although they were primarily raised by their mother, they saw their father as often as they could. A classic story of a divided, but still loving family. 3 years after the divorce, in 1996, Elizabeth met a prominent Alabama businessman named George Twitty, more often just called Jug. He was known as this wealthy Southern gentleman. The type you see in movies. Elizabeth fell for him right away. So, probably not surprising, they soon got married. With both kids in tow, Elizabeth relocated to the affluent suburb of Mountain Brook, Alabama, a very wealthy area, where Natalee Matthew enrolled in the local school. Since both of them were smart-friendly, they fit into their new, prestigious surroundings pretty quickly. A lot like her mother, Natalee was just the epitome of a Southern belle. That's not just a phrase. With bright eyes, blonde hair, a radiant smile, literally everyone who met her was struck by her charisma. She was friendly, outgoing, always taking the time to get to know everyone she met. By the time she graduated in 2005, she had become extremely popular, well-loved. She was the golden girl in the best sense of the term. She wasn't just pretty, either. As an honor student, a member of the National Honor Society, she also took dance classes, countless other extracurriculars. She was what you'd call an overachiever. As many of you know, especially if you watch American movies, college in the US can be, well, let's just say, extremely expensive. Students often get into hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, especially for long programs like medical school. It's a whole business. But despite Natalie, let's be honest, having her stepfather's wealth to back her education, she actually covered all her future costs herself by earning several prestigious scholarships. That says something about her character, doesn't it? She wasn't just relying on family money. Natalie was set to attend the University of Alabama on a full ride. Her whole life, it seemed, was mapped out ahead of her. It was looking beautiful. However, before she dove into the books, she had one unique opportunity. Her high school offered the graduating seniors a trip to the Caribbean island of Aruba to celebrate their achievements. Many parents thought, on the surface, this was a perfect way for the students to celebrate graduation. It really was a big milestone. It would not only give the parents a little time to relax away from their 18-year-olds, but it would also help the grads blow off steam before they started serious university studies. Sounds logical, but here's where the devil in the details comes in. What many didn't realize was that instead of a fully supervised, controlled school excursion, this trip was actually, just a fun trip, one loaded with alcohol, gambling. Why? Simple. In Aruba, the legal age for drinking, gambling is 18. That's a sharp contrast to the 21-year-old age limit back in the States. While that difference might seem minor to those of us in, say, Europe or Australia, where things are easier, in America, the drinking culture is very strictly defined by that age limit. 21 is the magic number. So the opportunity to go to Aruba, unsupervised by parents, was an incredibly exciting prospect for these graduates. Natalie was one of those people really looking forward to the chance to drink legally. On a tropical island, no less. Imagine that, incredible feeling of freedom for an 18-year-old. So after asking her father, her biological dad, Dave, to help fund the vacation getting the green light from her mother, she was all set for the journey. On Thursday, May 26, 2005, just days after her high school graduation, Natalie, along with over 120 other seniors, arrived in Aruba for a 5-day, all-inclusive celebration. Now, technically, there were chaperones there to monitor the students' safety, but despite that, the students outnumbered them by a ratio of, get this, 17-1. 17 18-year-olds getting their first taste of legal alcohol for every one adult. So yeah, not surprisingly, keeping track of every single graduate on that island was just physically impossible. The result was an almost totally unburdened, uncontrolled vacation, fueled by parties, alcohol, everything else you can imagine. The cocktails were flowing, the music was booming, the sun was beating down. Since the chaperones were completely overwhelmed, they made it their mission to at least check in with all the students daily, just to make sure they were okay. Well, as okay as possible during their various hangovers. Natalie herself, by the way, was included in this group of active vacationers. According to other students, she was seen drinking almost all day, every day. Friends said she would often wake up, start her morning with cocktails, sometimes being so hungover, she'd miss breakfast twice in a row. Again, 18 years old, first adult vacation. To illustrate the complete chaos of this trip, the owners of the Holiday Inn where the group was staying told the chaperones that if they planned on coming back next year, they were no longer welcome at that hotel. You really have to try hard to get that kind of recommendation. Unfortunately, this is exactly what set the stage for the pace today. A large group of young adults, partying day-night with minimal supervision. What could possibly go wrong? On the last full day of their vacation, all the students were determined to have their one final blowout party before heading home. Natalie herself had just met a 17-year-old Dutch national named Joran van der Sloot. He was 17, but being Dutch, he was legally living in the nearby town of Noord. They started talking, seemed to be genuinely enjoying each other's company. It's probably no surprise why Natalie later agreed to meet up with him for her last night on the island. Later that evening, Joran and Natalie met at the popular Carlos Charlie's bar in Oranjestad. It's an iconic spot there. They had a few drinks, danced together, only stopping when the bar closed at 1 a.m. As people were gathering their things to leave the club, Natalie's friends noticed she was about to get into a car with Joran, his friends, Deepak Satish Kalpo. These were two brothers, a little concerned, because, they were still strangers. Her friends asked her what her plan was, where she was actually going. Natalie, apparently, just figured she'd get a ride back to the hotel, get some sleep before heading home. Truthfully, she could have just as easily gone back with her friends, but evidently, this lift was going to get her home faster. A familiar decision at the end of a long night, right? I'll just grab a cab. It's quicker. Sadly, that would be the last time her friends ever saw her alive. Natalie, who was supposed to fly home the next day, still hadn't been found by sunrise. At first, her friends assumed maybe she'd just spent the night with Joran. But as time went on, their flight time got closer, she was still nowhere to be seen. That right there, that's a red flag. Her packed luggage, her passport were still in her room at the Holiday Inn. None of her friends or teachers could get in touch with her. She couldn't have left even if she wanted to. At this point, understandably, they all started to panic. Natalie was known for being responsible. She was always punctual, in the right place when she needed to be. So, for her to now be missing after a night out, with absolutely no explanation, to say it was alarming would be a massive understatement. The Aruban authorities were notified about the missing girl. As her classmates boarded the plane, flew out without her, they began to search the island for any trace or clues. As soon as her parents were informed, they, of course, also started to worry. Natalie's mother, her stepfather, Jug, immediately flew to the island on a private jet. Their daughter was lost in a foreign country. That, unfortunately, was the best-case scenario. The worst case, it was hard to even think about. But even though local authorities knew an American tourist was missing, this is strange, they still made almost no effort to find her. In fact, for several precious hours after she was reported gone, they didn't do much beyond a superficial search of the places she was last seen. This is Aruba, the safest island. Maybe they just weren't used to this kind of thing. Desperate for more information, Elizabeth George started their own investigation. They questioned the hotel staff, other vacationers in the area, hoping someone might be able to help them. Talking to everyone who would talk to them eventually led them to Natalie's last steps the night before. After the hotel, they went to check the bar where Natalie was last seen. Carlos Charlie's, of course. It was there they learned their daughter had left with a young Dutch national the previous night. With some pretty decent investigative skills for civilians, they even learned his name, Joran van der Sloot. After Joran was eventually located, he was questioned about Natalie's disappearance. While he seemed totally calm, he admitted that he'd left the bar with her two other friends. He also claimed the four of them then drove to a lighthouse, spent about an hour together, before driving back to the Holiday Inn, dropping Natalie off. Upon returning to the hotel, Joran said he'd later go looking for a security guard who had supposedly seen Natalie that night. Strangely though, this guard was nowhere to be found. Convenient. By this time, however, Natalie's case had captured the attention of the entire island. Even though she wasn't officially declared missing yet, over 100 people, volunteers, were searching all over the island. It's safe to say the details of this sudden disappearance were enough to concern everyone who heard about it. So, it's really no wonder the community came together like that. Over the next 4 days, groups of locals, tourists checked literally every corner of the island, hoping, praying to find her just, trapped or stranded somewhere, but otherwise healthy. On June 5th, authorities finally detained several security guards, whom they labeled as corrupt, hoping for some kind of lead. Unfortunately, it seems they were barking up the wrong tree entirely, as all the detained guards were released only 8 days later. The next step in their chaotic efforts was trying to question Joran's father, who, oddly, acted very quiet during the entire interrogation. Then, a local DJ also claimed to know something, but his information turned out to be false. Since both of those attempts proved completely useless, both men were eventually let go. The investigation was hitting a dead end. The girl was still missing.
5 police in Aruba have made a new arrest in connection with the disappearance of Mountain Brook teenager Natalie Holloway. They've arrested the father of a Dutch teen who's been in custody for 2 weeks. The wife of Paul Vandersloot says her husband was just picked up by police. Anita Vandersloot says she thought her family was innocent. Now she, quote, doesn't know what to think. Mrs. Vandersloot says she believes her son is being unfairly targeted simply because he was one of the last people to see Natalie Holloway. Anita Vandersloot says her son, Joran, is mentally strong, but she also thinks the interrogations would have broken him down by now if he knew anything. The Dutch teen's mother says a meeting with Holloway's mother was very emotional, and she can't understand why Holloway thinks Joran and the others being detained know more than they've already told investigators. Vandersloot says her son is just an ordinary teenager who is getting ready to go to college in the U.S. She says, why would a boy with a normal life, quote, do something wrong to a girl he had just met?
You would think the authorities on this safest island would question our main suspects. Well, obviously the 3 men last seen with Natalie. That's just basic investigative logic, right? But it actually took them 9 days to question any of them. 9. This only happened after Natalie's family with American government officials started applying pressure. This is exactly why time in these cases is always crucial. Because by the time these 3 men were finally arrested, they had more than enough time to not just, formulate their story, but to align it with each other. The 2 Kalpoe brothers, Deepak Satish, who were last seen in the car alongside Joran and Natalie, gave authorities a clear story. They dropped Joran and Natalie off at the beach. Then they returned home. In a separate interview, Joran claimed the same thing. Everything seemed to line up. However, this new story was radically different from that first one he so calmly told Natalie's parents. Remember, back then he said they drove to the lighthouse, then he took her to the Holiday Inn. In this new story, he claimed that shortly after arriving at the beach, he just went home, simply leaving Natalie alone on the beach, at night, in a foreign country. So now we have a man who we know for a fact was with Natalie the night she disappeared, who was obviously, infatuated with her, but who had already changed his story at least twice. Something here it just wasn't adding up. For over a month, the Kalpoe brothers, Joran Vandersloot, were held in Aruban police custody while the, quote, investigation continued. On July 4th, an Aruban judge ordered Deepak Satish to be released, but demanded that Joran, the main suspect, remain in custody for at least 60 more days. With no new information or real leads, Natalie's family, the various search groups, started to fall into, genuine despair. I mean, imagine spending over a month on a foreign, yes, paradise island, frantically searching for your child, who's been missing for weeks now. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Sometimes silence is the loudest sound. Her absence, this lack of answers, was agonizing for everyone who loved her. Then, to add to that pain, no new evidence ever turned up. On July 17th, it seemed like, miraculously, the case might break. There was this glimmer of hope. Search teams found a piece of duct tape on the northeastern coast of Aruba, not far from Nord, the town where Joran lived. At the same time, authorities rearrested Deepak Satish. The tape, it looked like, had blonde hair attached to it, so a lot of people at that moment thought, this is it, this hair could belong to Natalie. But after the evidence was sent for forensic analysis, the sample came back negative. It wasn't her. It was just another, brutal false hope that threw the Holloway family right back into despair. Things got worse when, just 2 weeks after that, Jor and the brothers were officially released from custody, which, sadly, allowed them to once again roam freely, not just on the island, but away from it. With all the main suspects released, with a complete lack of new leads, the investigation, unfortunately, just completely stalled. What was once a rapid, desperate search had now devolved into this, slowly simmering, toxic mix of arrests, lies, releases. At one point, as we'll find out, even extortion. Weeks turned into months, so as those months rolled into 2006, Joran Vandersloot, that same 17-year-old kid, remained firmly in the public spotlight. He almost became a celebrity. But in March 2006, 10 months after Natalie disappeared, Joran got the chance to tell his side of the story in a big interview with Fox News. Here, he again detailed the night of Natalie's disappearance, also claiming he left her on the beach before going home. As for some of the weirder details, well, just listen for yourself. How, in your opinion, are you portrayed in all this?
How do you think you've been portrayed in all this?
I think I've been portrayed unfairly. I think it's about time that people get to see the other side of the story.
Are you ready to tell the truth?
Yeah.
Did you kill Natalie Holloway?
No.
Did you harm Natalie Holloway?
No.
And why should you be believed after all the lying that you've done in this situation?
There's absolutely no reason to believe me.
This so-called interview, this telling all, well, of course it didn't change the public's opinion of Joran. Nobody really expected it to, I guess. For Natalie's family, for the rest of the Islanders, he was definitely hiding something. It was written all over his face, in his constantly changing stories. Later, in December of that same year, Natalie's parents, just desperate at this point, turned their attention to the two other men in the case, the Calpo brothers, hoping maybe they knew something about their daughter, or perhaps they'd be easier to break than Joran. So in what was, just an obvious act of desperation, hoping to get any new information from Deepak or Satish, they filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit against them. It's a classic move when the criminal system fails. If you can't put them in jail, hit their wallet. Maybe then they'll talk. However, despite their confidence, they were let down only 6 months later when a judge just dismissed the lawsuit. Another dead end. A lot of this continued throughout 2007. Natalie's parents were desperate for any new developments. Even though the three main suspects were arrested again under a wave of some new pressure, they were released just a month later. It was just a carousel: arrest, hold, release. None of the guys changed their stories. They stuck to their agreed-upon lie. Time just seemed to be eroding any hope of finding new evidence. By 2008, the Aruban police, it seems, had had enough. They were just tired of this problem ruining their Paradise Island reputation. Nothing new had surfaced in the last year and a half. So, unfortunately, that's when the island's chief prosecutor, Hans Moos, declared the case closed. Just closed. This was, to put it mildly, deeply disappointing for Natalie's parents. Her mother, Beth, just full of grief, publicly stated the thing that every parent of a missing child dreads saying, that she was now convinced she would never see her daughter alive again. It was a surrender of hope. However, while this was happening, literally on the other side of the world, a veteran Dutch reporter got a pretty unique opportunity. If the authorities couldn't do it, maybe journalism could. This was a chance to trap Joran Vandersloot in an undercover sting. Working with one of Joran's so-called new friends, the legendary Dutch reporter Peter de Vries was tasked by authorities to set him up, gain his trust, hopefully get that confession from Joran. It was a dangerous game, but what else was left to hope for? But if done right, this could be the very thing they needed to confirm his involvement in Natalie's disappearance. The plan? Well, it worked. It worked almost too perfectly. Joran, feeling safe with his friend, confessed that as soon as he and Natalie were alone on the beach, she suddenly started having, convulsions. Unfortunately for him, but fortunately for justice, this confession was recorded on a hidden camera set up in the car. The confession's in Dutch, so, no point in showing it, but this infamous video just caught him off guard. He was telling it with such bravado, such calm. Unable to revive her, Joran, according to his own words, called a friend, asked him for help with the body. Not 911, not an ambulance. A friend to help with the body. This alleged friend then told Joran to go home while he handled the problem, then took her body out to sea. As soon as this video became public, the outcry was insane. The internet just exploded. It seemed like the case, at least partly, was solved. Everyone was expecting Joran's immediate arrest. Of course, as soon as he was confronted, Joran insisted. He was lying the whole time. It's his favorite tactic. He claimed he was just making up a story to impress his new friend, because, bragging about disposing of a body so impressive. But ultimately, nothing he claimed was true. It was just a game, a fantasy. So this just unpleasant, disgusting pattern continued. The Holloway family was desperately searching for answers, clutching at any hope, while the men who knew exactly what happened stayed silent, all while remaining just out of reach of prosecution. Despite the Aruban prosecutor's office, under public pressure, announcing the case was reopening after Joran's video, realistically, the investigation was still in the same state it was when it closed. It was ice cold. The video was interesting, but apparently not enough for an Aruban court. By 2010, 5 years had passed since Natalie disappeared. 5 long years. But this year marked a very obvious, shocking shift. It all happened because of Joran's growing depravity confidence. He thought he was untouchable. In a just stunning but also incredibly stupid display of greed, Joran personally contacted the Holloway family's lawyer, a man named Kelly. He offered a deal. He offered the location of their daughter's body in exchange for $275,000 in cash. He decided to monetize his one big secret. Joran demanded $25,000 up front. Then, the next $250,000 after the body was positively identified. So, after a quick chat with the family, Kelly replied agreed, obviously knowing this was a setup, before he forwarded all the information to the FBI. So, let's just stop for a second and reflect, because I think this is pretty important. The level of audacity you have to have, this man, who had already caused so much pain, anger, despair for this family, was now willing to literally extort them for information about their presumably murdered daughter. It's just unbelievably disgusting. Really, it all makes sense why they agreed to play along, because the family was so desperate to know what happened to Natalie. They would have paid anything. Sure, that money could always be recovered, but the main thing? This was bait. After taking the family lawyer to some building, Joran gave another new story. He claimed that his father, now he's dragging his father into it, who was deceased by this point, had actually buried Natalie's body in the building's foundation, which of course was now impossible to retrieve. It was just another brazen lie to get the money run. After exchanging this fake info, the family lawyer gave Joran the rest of the advance, an additional $15,000. So now, with the full advance of $25,000 in his bank account, courtesy of the FBI, Joran got on the next flight to Peru. He thought he'd beaten the system. However, the U.S. Department of Justice was monitoring Joran's transactions. Of course, they weren't planning on letting him get away with it, at least not this crime. So on June 3rd, 2010, he was indicted for extortion wire fraud, a serious federal crime. Later that month, he was officially charged. But as we're about to find out, Joran, while fleeing one crime, found himself in an even more serious situation down in Peru. He brought the chaos with him. This happened on May 30th, 2010, in the city of Lima, Peru's capital. Police were investigating a missing person report for a young woman who had vanished just days earlier. Meanwhile, at a nearby hotel, staff was doing a routine cleaning of the rooms when they suddenly came across a terrible scene. A maid entered a hotel room, found the body of a young woman. She had been killed in a brutal way. It was eventually learned the body belonged to 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez. As it turned out, the The room was rented in the name of, who else? Joran Vandersloot. He had come to Peru on the Holloway's money, immediately found a new victim. But by the time authorities figured this out, Joran, of course, was nowhere to be found. In a bizarre, horrific coincidence, he kills Stephanie on the exact 5-year anniversary of Natalie's disappearance, May 30th. That's not a coincidence. That's a sick signature. Officially a fugitive, he did everything he could to evade authorities in South America. Fleeing Peru, he cut-dyed his hair red, then headed for Chile, thinking again he was going to get away. But it didn't last forever. This time, he wasn't in safe Aruba, where apparently he had cover. Just 4 days later, our villain was spotted in a taxi in the coastal city of Viña del Mar, where thankfully he was immediately arrested. After he was transported back to Lima, he was placed in a maximum security prison, where pretty quickly he then confessed to the murder of Stephanie.
The bombshell confession came late last night. Under intense questioning, the 22-year-old Joran reportedly told investigators that he attacked Stephanie Flores. He grabbed her by the neck when she took his laptop, he said, and started reading articles about him on the internet. "I did not want to do it," he tearfully admitted. "The girl intruded into my private life. She had no right. I confronted her. She was frightened. We argued, and she wanted to get away. I grabbed her by her neck and I hit her."
Stephanie Flores Ramirez, she was a third-year business administration student when she met Joran during a poker game. So apparently, wanting to continue playing poker online, she went with him to the hotel. According to Joran himself, he snapped, what a convenient familiar phrase for him, when he supposedly caught Stephanie spying on his computer. When he questioned her, she, according to his version, confessed she was looking for information that could link him to Natalie. Then, in a rage, he took her life. He snapped, led to him taking her life just because she looked at his laptop. After a pretty smooth trial, because this time, unlike Aruba, they had a body, a crime scene, with a relatively quick confession, Joran was sentenced to 28 years in prison for the death of Stephanie Ramirez. He was also ordered to pay 75,000 soles in reparations, equivalent to about $20,000 or 16,000 pounds. So despite all his titanic efforts to avoid responsibility for what happened to Natalie, it was this second terrible act, which happened because of his fame from the first crime, that would eventually catch him. Such a, twist of fate. You might have realized I skipped the details of what happened to Stephanie, but there was a very good reason for that. I plan to share her story, her voice, in another separate video in a few days. So be ready for that. For the simplicity of this narrative, we'll briefly cover the further details. But in 2014, while in a Peruvian prison, Joran got married. Yup, you heard that right. He got married. To his then-girlfriend, 24-year-old Lady Figueroa, with a child already on the way, because Peruvian prisons, apparently, have their own rules about conjugal visits. Joran sat behind bars, as we are told, reflecting on his actions, although, more likely, he was just reflecting on his sentence. He knew that, no matter what, he wasn't getting out of there anytime soon. He was looking at staying there for the next 26 years. Then he was supposed to be sent back to the US to serve his sentence for extorting money from Natalie's family. But perhaps, keeping that American warrant in mind, he was increasingly keen to stay silent about Natalie's death. Better to sit in Peru than end up in the American federal system. But on May 10th, 2023, something unexpected happened. Peruvian officials announced they were transferring Joran to the US. It wasn't permanent. Legally, it was called a temporary transfer request. He was being transferred to finally face trial on charges of wire fraud extortion related to that same 2010 indictment. The plan was Joran would be charged on U.S. soil, stand trial, then be returned to Peru to serve the remainder of his sentence. Natalie's mother, Beth, also shared her own thoughts, sharing that finally, after 18 years, this felt like real justice. But Joran, of course, wasn't going to make this easy for anyone. Facing the American court in Alabama, Playing his usual game, he pleaded not guilty to the extortion fraud charges. I mean, it's Joran. He's always not guilty. After that, he was transferred to the county jail, where he had even more time to think about what lay ahead. Let's analyze the situation he was in. Joran was already serving a 28-year sentence in a harsh Peruvian prison. Now, facing new, separate federal charges, he realized another long trial awaited him in America. One that could add, several more decades after Peru. So remembering all this, he realized the old tactic of, I was lying, it was a fantasy, just wasn't going to work anymore. He understood he had to change his attitude, look for a deal. You probably see where this is going. After returning to court, Joran was offered a plea agreement. But what a deal it was. If Joran pleaded guilty to the extortion fraud charges, also, this was the hook. Confessed fully under oath to what really happened to Natalee Holloway, he would receive only 20 years in prison, which would run concurrently with his Peruvian sentence. Most importantly, he would be exempt from any future charges related to Natalee's death in the US. So, it's no surprise this pathological narcissist agreed. For him, it was a pure win. He pleaded guilty to extortion, laid it all out. But the story he finally shared about that night with Natalee, it turned out to be just as terrible, senseless, devastating as you would expect. Joran claimed that after Natalee got a ride from Deepak Satish, meaning the Kalpo brothers, it seems, weren't lying about just dropping them off. They ended up alone on the beach. That night, Joran, of course, only had one thing on his mind: getting physical. He turned on his charm, tried to pressure Natalee. At first, she seemed not to mind the attention. But after he became too pushy, she made it clear she wasn't interested in any kind of physical relationship with him. As Joran became more persistent, Natalee's resistance also grew. She pushed him away. But unfortunately, Joran, this hot-headed 17-year-old, not used to the word no, became more aggressive. Then, in his own words, he struck her very hard, which caused her to fall back onto the sand. Likely she was already unconscious. In a fit of pure, uncontrolled rage, he picked up a heavy object that was nearby, used it to inflict a fatal injury. He ended her life right there. Joran knew that if he had any chance of escaping punishment for what he did on safe Aruba, where nothing bad happens, he couldn't just leave her there. That's when he took her remains into the moonlit ocean, let the water take them away. This was his final, official version. The scene he described was intense. The emotions felt in the courtroom, where Natalee's mother was present, formed this just terrible cocktail of grief, rage, sadness, 18 years of frustration. But even though it was finally, painfully clear their daughter would never come home, her family at least finally knew what happened. It was a horrible, but still an ending point. So after his devastating confession became known to the world, Joran van der Sloot was returned to Peru to continue serving his first of 2 separate sentences.
He has this sentence, they're going to let him serve it concurrently, so he's not going to serve any time in an American jail. He's going back to Peru.
Well, he might. And so for folks who might be a little bit confused about, well, why is he here and now going back to Peru? As Sam said, it's because he actually was convicted of killing another young woman. And because that conviction came first, he still has to serve out that prison sentence in Peru. But if for whatever reason, say he got out of prison early in Peru, he would be immediately transferred back to the United States to serve out the rest of the 20-year sentence that he has for killing Natalee.
Joran is currently behind bars in a Peruvian prison, where he's scheduled to be released, get this, in 2043. But that's not the end. After that, he will be transferred to an American prison where he'll stay until 2063. He'll get out, if he even lives that long, as just a very, very old man. In the end, even though their daughter is physically gone, with no official, separate charges for her death ever being filed, the Holloway family, as they say, is satisfied with the justice that was served in Joran van der Sloot's case. They got what they sought for 18 years, a confession under oath, the knowledge that this person will never be free to harm anyone else. After almost 20 years of suffering absolute, grueling uncertainty, Dave, Elizabeth Holloway endured, fought for justice for their daughter. Of course, George, her stepfather, fought for his stepdaughter. So now, at the end of this horrific road, with her killer guaranteed to be behind bars, likely for the rest of his life, they can finally find that closure to this tragedy. They can remember their daughter for who she really was. Natalie was a wonderful, smart girl, a friend to everyone. That same golden girl from Alabama we talked about. Even though her life was cut short so tragically, so early, as we now know, over such a senseless, petty reason as turning a guy down, the impact she had on the people around her is impressive, can still be felt. It's a really wild story when you think about it, with more twists, lies, surprises than I can even begin to count. To this day, Natalie's body has never been found. Given his confession that he put her in the ocean, it's sadly unlikely it ever will be. The sea keeps its secrets. However, I think with that, our case today is effectively closed. We have answers, as terrible as they are. As I mentioned earlier, I will be making a second video about Stephanie's story, as she absolutely deserves just as much focus as Natalie. She shouldn't just be a footnote or, a secondary victim in Joran's story. I mean, there's still so much more to tell about Joran's childhood, his father, who, maybe knew or even helped. Of course, Stephanie's full story. But yeah, that's a topic for a second video. Well, folks, that is the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will see you all again very soon. But until that moment comes, please remember to take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and, of course, stay safe. Thank you. Goodbye.